Greetings to class 10 and welcome to a new video of economic application. I'm your Nigam sir and today we'll start a new chapter that is capital. The syllabus from this chapter for your ICSE are capital, its meaning, types and characteristics, and capital formation. The topics that we will be dealing out here in this video are the meaning of capital, types of capital, characteristics of capital, and lastly, we will also understand the meaning of capital formation. Now, let us discuss about the meaning of capital. In the earlier video, we studied about the other factors of production like land and labor. And in this video, we are going to study about the capital. So, what do you mean by capital? So, all those man-made goods which are used in the further production of goods are called capital. So, what do you mean by capital? Capital refers to all those goods which are made by man and which are used in the production of another commodity is known as capital. For example, machines, tools, equipments, buildings, railways, raw material, etc. So all these items are used in the production of another commodity. So these are capital. Now let us understand the different types of capital. We can distinguish or we can classify the different types of capital depending upon its use and its nature. The first one is the fixed capital and the working capital. Then we have sunk capital and floating capital, remunerative capital and auxiliary capital, concrete capital, money capital and debt capital. Then we have consumption capital and production capital, internal capital and external capital, national capital, internal capital, private capital and public capital. And lastly, we have trade capital and the social capital. Let us start with the fixed capital and the working capital. Fixed capital refers to the producer goods having long life which can be used again and again in the productive process. So what do you mean by fixed capital? Capital refers to all those producer goods which have a long life and which can be used again and again for producing many goods. Understood? For example, machines, plants and factory, building, etc. are some of the example of fixed capital. If you take an example of our school, then the fixed capital of Sacred Heart School are chairs, tables, blackboard, duster, school building, school playground. So all these are the example of fixed capital which are used by the students while getting education, while getting services in our school, and that goes on forever and that will remain with the school forever. Understood? So that type of capital is known as the fixed capital. Working capital includes all those items which can be used for a specific purpose only once. For example, cotton and paper are some of the examples of such capital. For example, if you take an example of a cotton industry, then cotton is the raw material that is used and which goes in the production of a commodity only once. You cannot use the same cotton again and again for making a cotton cloth. Okay, if you need to make another cotton cloth, then another raw cotton is required. Similarly, if fuel is an example of another working capital, okay, you cannot use the same fuel again and again in the production of commodity because it gets exhausted after production. Is it clear? So if you use fuel right now, then you'll have to use another fuel in the another production process. Okay, so that gets used. So that type of capital is known as working capital. Another type of capital is the sunk capital and the floating capital. Sunk capital is that capital which can be used to produce only one type of commodity or service and cannot be shifted to any other use. For example, printing machine. Printing machine can be used only for printing, it cannot be used for other purposes. So that type of capital which is used only for the production of one commodity or the production of one service is known as the sunk capital. Then we have the floating capital. Floating capital includes all such items which can be put to alternate uses. Okay, floating capital are those capital which can be used in the production of many commodities. For example, electricity, money, fuel, steel, etc. So all these items are used in the production of many commodities. If you take an example of electricity, electricity is used in the production of, suppose, a book. Okay, it might also be used in the production of other things like shoes, bags, etc. Understood? It can also be used in the production of other items like furnitures. Okay, in making furnitures. Understood? So all those items or all those capital which goes in the production, which are used in the production of many commodities, are known as floating capital. Next type of capital is the remunerative capital and the auxiliary capital. Remunerative capital are those capital which is given to the workers in the form of wages. So usually the workers are required in the production of goods. So whatever monetary payment that is made to them in the form of wages is known as remunerative capital. Then we have the auxiliary capital. Auxiliary capital are those capital which helps the laborer to produce another good. For example, hammers, pliers, electricity, etc. are the examples of auxiliary capital, because the machines, raw materials, raw materials like hammer are used in the production of another commodity. So that type of capital is known as the auxiliary capital. Now comes the concrete capital, money capital, and the debt capital. So what do you mean by concrete capital? Concrete capital is also known by another name, that is real capital. Concrete capital includes all that property which is in the hands of the producer and it has money value. Okay. For example, furniture, building, etc. comes under the concrete capital because it is the property of the owner. Okay, and it also has monetary value in the market. So that type of capital is known as the concrete capital. Another type of capital is the money capital. Money capital is utilized by the producer for the purpose of different things like tools, machines, buildings, for transportation, etc. Money cannot produce anything by itself, but it helps in the production of other commodity, because money is used in buying or in procuring different things which help in the production of another commodity. Is it clear? So that type of capital is known as money capital. Money capital simply means money only, because money is one of a capital which is utilized in every business or in every enterprises to buy different things like raw materials, to engage workers in the production activity. Understood? So that is known as the money capital. Lastly, we have the debt capital. Debt capital represents the invested funds which yields income. The examples of debt capital are shares, stocks, government securities, debentures, etc. So all this capital are those capital which are in the form of investment. People usually invest in all of these instruments so that they can earn income on it. So that type of capital is known as debt capital. Now let us move to another slide. Now we have the consumption capital and the production capital. Let us first understand the consumption capital. Capital which is used for the direct satisfaction of human wants is known as consumption capital. For example, capital that are spent on food, clothing, health, education, etc. are known as consumption capital, because all those money that are spent on food, on the on all those money which are spent on clothing, health, education. We are investing, we are spending the money on all these items so that it satisfies our human wants directly. So that type of capital is known as consumption capital, which satisfies the human wants. So that type of capital is known as the consumption capital. Now we have production capital. Capital which directly helps in the production of goods. Example, machines, tools, factories, etc. are known as production capital. By the term itself, it is a production, it is helping in the production of another good. So that type of capital is known as the production capital. Now we have the internal capital and the external capital. Now let us first understand the internal capital. When the capital of a country is used within its domestic territory of a country, it is called the internal capital. For example, if you take an example of our school, Sacred Heart is also a business firm. Understood? So the chairs, the benches, the duster, blackboard, all these items are the capital of our school. Okay, so all this capital are produced in our country only. Understood? So all those capital which are produced in our country, and if a firm uses that capital is known as internal capital. Is it clear? Because that is used within our, that is produced in the country, and that is also used within the country only. So that type of capital is known as the internal capital. Now, another type of capital is the external capital or the foreign capital. So, when the capital is obtained from the foreign country and used in our country, it is called the external or foreign capital. If you take an example of our school again, then suppose our what do you call, our director sir buys a projector from another country, suppose from US, and if he buys from US and if he brings in our school and if we start using that, then that becomes the external capital, because that capital has been obtained from the foreign country and it is used in our country. So that type of capital is known as the foreign capital. Another type of capital is the national capital and the international capital. National capital includes all the private and the public capital in a country. So all those capital which belongs to the country is known as the national capital. Okay, there are different capital that we have in our country in the form of factories, machineries, which might be private or which might be public. Is it clear? So that are the examples of national capital. Another type of capital is the internal capital. Sorry, not internal capital, international capital. International capital is owned by two or more than two countries. For example, Kosi project is a joint project of India and Nepal. Okay, Kosi, there is a project that is made on the river Kosi. Okay, where the capital of both India and Nepal has been used. So that is why it is known as the international capital, because it is owned by both India as well as Nepal. Because that Kosi project, the facility or the service provided by the Kosi project is for both India as well as Nepal. So it is owned by two countries. So that type of capital is known as international capital. Now comes the private capital and the public capital. This is easy. Capital which is invested in a private sector or private people is known as the private capital. For example, Tata, Birlas, Reliance India. So all those capital that are invested in these private companies are known as the private capital. On the other hand, capital which is invested by the government in public sector is known as the public capital. For example, all those machineries, tools, equipments, factories that are used in Vilai steel plant, in Durgapur steel plant are the examples of public capital, because it has been invested by the government and it has not been invested by the private people. So that is why it is called the public capital. Lastly, we have the trade capital and the social capital. What do you mean by trade capital? Trade capital includes all such items which an individual uses for his trade or occupation. For example, tools, raw materials, plow, etc. So all these items, that is tools, that is machines, raw materials, are usually used for the production of commodity. Understood? So all those items or all those things that an individual or that a person uses for a trade or for occupation is known as the trade capital. For example, a carpenter uses a hammer, a carpenter uses a saw. So all that item for him is a trade capital. On the other hand, we have social capital. Social capital includes all those kinds of items which yield commodities and service as a whole. For example, government hospitals, schools, power plants, dams, mines, etc. So all these are owned by the community, by the society. They are there because it helps the whole society. It does not help only one people. So that uh, item or that capital which is there for the society or which is there for a community at large is known as the social capital. So these were the different types of capital. Now let us know something about the characteristics of capital. The first characteristics of capital is that capital is the result of past labor. Why it is called the result of past labor is that because the human efforts are combined with the natural resources in order to produce a different goods like tools, machinery, etc. That is why the it is called that capital is the result of past labor, because human efforts have been used out here with the help of different other natural resources in order to produce the goods, in order to produce different producer goods like machinery, tools, etc. So that is why it is called the result of past labor. Second, capital is the result of saving. Capital is called a result of saving because it has been made out of the saving that has been done by man. Okay, whatever capital like machines, tools, raw material, etc. have been there, have been produced because of the saving that is done by the man. It is not the free gift of nature. Understood? It has been produced by the man because man has done the saving in order to produce that commodity. Okay, its supply might increase or decrease by the efforts of man. The third characteristic is capital is not an indispensable factor of production. What do you mean by indispensable? Indispensable means important. So capital is not considered to be as important factor of production like land and labor. Land and labor are considered to be very important factor of production because without land and labor nothing can be produced. The fourth characteristic is capital is a mobile factor because it has the highest mobility if you compare it with other factors like land. Okay, because capital can move from one place to another. The fifth characteristic is that the supply of capital is elastic. Elastic means it can be changed, it can be adjusted. Okay, the supply of capital can be adjusted easily according to their demands. If the demand is more, then the supply can be increased. If the demand is less, then the supply of that capital can be reduced. That is why the supply of capital is elastic. Another characteristic is that capital is not a permanent factor of production. Capital is not a permanent factor of production like land. Okay, it gets decreased, it gets depreciated. If a person uses the same capital for a long period of time, then that gets deteriorated, that gets depreciated because it has a lifetime. Okay, it cannot be used for a long period of time. It gets it gets destroyed. So that is why it is not a permanent factor of production. Another characteristic is that it is not a free gift of nature. It is not given by the nature, and it has been produced by the efforts of the man. That is why it is called man-made goods. Lastly, capital can be reproduced or replenished. Okay, capital can be reproduced means more capital can be produced. Capital is normally considered to be as temporary in nature, and it gets destroyed after time. So these were the different characteristics of capital. Now lastly, we have the meaning of capital formation. So what do you mean by capital formation? Capital formation simply means creation of capital, creation of more capital. It means making or increasing of more capital goods such as machines, tools, factories, buildings, etc., which are to be used in the production of more goods. So capital formation simply means creation of more capital goods like machines, tools, factories, buildings. And why they are created more? So that more commodity can be produced. So that is what is known as capital formation. There are three stages of capital formation. They are creation of saving, mobilization of saving, and investment of saving. So we have come to the end of this video. I hope you understood. If you have any confusion, then we will be dealing that in our Zoom class. Thank you, students.